The Holy Father goes on to advocate a reform of the United Nations with world political authority to avert greater imbalances. We should hope this might happen. But who, I wonder, is able to get this wonderful prospect in focus in the near term? We must pray there's not another crisis of this nature, particularly of the type that an Irishman, inevitably named Paddy, who'd always wanted to go up in an aeroplane and jump down in a parachute to Earth. And eventually his ambition was fulfilled, except that when he jumped from the plane, the parachute refused to open. He was halfway back to Earth, in a state of some panic, as you might imagine, when he met a man coming in the opposite direction. A likely story. "Oh," says Paddy, "do you know how to open a parachute?" "No," says the other man. "Do you know how to mend a gas cooker?" There are times when the complexity of life beats us all. And perhaps the real challenge facing us as Catholic Christians is that who, if anybody outside the Christian community, is listening to the Church's teaching on moral behaviour? Aren't we simply engaged in a dialogue of the deaf? Or perhaps the majority of those in today's secular society are simply, to use a Tudor phrase, looking through fingers, seeing and hearing everything, but pretending complete ignorance. Today, belief in God is among many options. This is the Catholicity of Malta is perhaps unique in the world. But if you look elsewhere in Europe, not least in my own country, you'll find that now only 7 or 8% of a nation's population goes to church with any sense of regularity. Paradox is that people's quest for spiritual certitude remains absolutely constant and has done in the UK and the States for the last 30 or 40 years at around 70%. But what they mean by spiritual certitude, because any concept of the transcendent in the sense that we understand it has frankly been eclipsed, and moral authority has gone walkabout. There are conflicting ideologies competing for our loyalty, and most Christian thinking in much of Europe in particular has been replaced by humanist doctrines of autonomous reason. These are things we are all aware of today and struggle to live with and to repair. Another paradox, however, is that despite this loss of the sense of the transcendent in Christian convictions, the world of business and banking are all claiming to have really strong and abide by really strong ethical criteria. Indeed, in both the States and Canada and the UK, some 70%, in fact, of all Western companies claim to possess and apply codes of ethics. This, it is said, is because such managements have realised that in a postmodern society, ethical considerations can affect and even determine an organisation's reputation and even its permission to survive. But is this a legitimate ethics? Is it real or just a facade? Because the recent financial turmoil, of which we all to a greater or lesser extent been subject to experience over the last year or so, has tended to suggest that any adherence to ethical criteria in banking has been much more apparent than real. Rather, it would appear that the financial community has at best shown a scant recognition for the fact that society, that's you and me, not only apply commercial criteria when dealing with our personal monies, but are equally anxious to ensure that the banks are aware of the social criteria that we apply in deciding whether they are trustworthy or not. It's an absolutely fundamental equation that, it seems to us, for many financial institutions, has yet to gain understanding. The great Catholic philosopher Alistair MacIntyre comments on this. Financial leadership now, at best, has only an inadequate understanding of ethics. Maybe said that the constituents banking and commerce exist to serve have all too often been reduced to an abstract commodity. You and I are not customers in a personal sense, but as far as marketing men in banking are concerned, were simple numbers. And in this regard, MacIntyre goes on, there's a metaphysical belief in management expertise, almost a religious replacement. And it's an excuse for continuing to participate in the charades, very violent, that are consequently enacted. And it's the Jewish philosopher, who tragically died a couple of years ago, the late Gillian Rose, who I think for many of us sums it up. The new ethics, this is the corporate and financial ethics now applied commonly around the world. The new ethics does naught but plunder the world for the booty of its self-seeking interest. This is an ethics that denies identity to the other and finally descends into a state of despairing rationalization without reason. We return to Pope Benedict's latest encyclical. My reading of this is that his primary concern is that those in the business world in general and the financial community in particular are in thrall to an instrumentalist or utilitarian thinking. Hence the Holy Father's underlying argument that this thinking has developed an atomistic outlook, a way of thinking that regressively redistributes wealth, that encourages greed, enhances individualism, and ultimately threatens society's stability. Hans Kung serves to summarize this view. There's a danger that the subsystem of the market economy becomes elevated to a total system. And in this situation, ethics is ultimately sacrificed to power and profit and replaced by what brings success, what gives us pleasure. It's Thomas Aquinas, no less, who adds a couple of footnotes in this regard. Giving good value for money is fine and essential, he says, but for heaven's sake, remember that personal integrity and personal honesty are the most fundamental conditions of leadership. And intuitively, if some have a superabundance greater than others, greater than their needs, others will be going without. So the position we're in now is that of a dichotomy, because at the very moment when the sheer pressures on managements wrought by the credit crunch have besieged their judgments, the other side of the equation, ethical challenges have emerged of a scale and complexity outside living memory. And to this extent, at least, Caritas in Veritate is at one with political endeavours. It's saying that new forms of cooperation in economic relationships must be created, recognising that a cooperative engagement is necessary that may well eclipse older, more localised but outdated forms of making money and wealth distribution. It's neither going to be a short nor simple term to enable resolution. Not least because information technologies are redoubling in power every 18 to 24 months. And as a consequence, money is becoming nomadic, detached from its original purpose. To exemplify this, in the 6 years following the fall of the Berlin Wall, 50 new stock markets were established around the world, leading to a threefold growth in the capital available, reportedly 2,000 trillion euros. That's Mickey Mouse money to me, but this is the report. And it's arguable that this development, more than any other, has permitted and even encouraged the misdemeanours occasioned in such things as asset stripping and the irresponsible risks taken in derivatives trading and trading and short selling. It's under such pressures as these that many states and geographic regions are now caught in an economic straitjacket. They're unable to respond to demands for higher productivity because their purchasing power is being disrupted or destroyed under the sheer pressures of speculation. And they are the victims of a chain reaction against which smaller states and regions in particular have very little protection. It's been commonly agreed by the pundits that the recession of the last 18 months has been due mainly to a conflation of the banking community's greed, management ignorance or irresponsibility, a woeful lack of adequate governance, and at least originally all compounded by government naivety. What on earth do we do now? Well, back to our man with the closed parachute. Whatever the final verdict, some in the financial world are earning amazing sums of money. And it was a study we were asked to do by the Christian denominations, all of them clubbed together, marched into my college about November of last year, saying, please could you, define, describe, and tell us how we're going to get out of the financial crisis. Just like that. And on the back of an envelope, please tell us the difference between what constitutes reasonable and excessive compensation. Okay. This reveals some startling and quite frightening information. All the data for last year shows that chief executives working for the 100 largest companies in the UK enjoyed a gross remuneration of not less than 3 million euros. Whereas in comparison, the average employee's wage packet working for a similar company was 27,000 euros. The chairman of the now defunct Layman, Dick Field, is believed to have received between $300 and $500 million in the 5-year period up to the bank's collapse. At a time when for every one